Tight. My name's Phil. I'm an alcoholic. And it's real nice to be here tonight. I currently live in Valencia, which is just outside of Los Angeles, but 21 years ago in October, I arrived in Santa Maria and brought the message to all these suffering people here. And promptly got in a lot of disputes with guys like Denning Lyons and Bill Evans and a few other people around. Because I've always been considered the renegade of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a lot of opinions that do not jive with a lot of people's opinions in Alcoholics Anonymous. But the reason for that is that my sponsor told me I had a right to my opinion and I could remain wrong just as long as I chose to remain wrong. So in some cases I have hung on to some of those things for many, many years. But so today has been a terrific memory trip for me. You know, I have told many people, including my wife Dorothy, that the time I spent in Santa Maria was the best. It was the best job I ever had, the best people I was ever around, the best town I was ever in. I really, thoroughly love Santa Maria. I do. And it was only because of work requirements. I'm old enough, you know, that if you want to move, you got to move. So I moved. But that's only because Lockheed didn't get the Western Test Range contract. If they got that, I'd have been haunting you all for the last 20 years, because that was what that was supposed to be. It's good to see some young guys here tonight. When I came in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was the youngest male member of AA in Southern California. And before that, however, I had been rejected for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 25 years of age, which is 35 years ago. That's quite a while. And I only mention this so that you young guys can understand that the understanding and the abilities of Alcoholics Anonymous have developed and grown over the years, because I was in jail in New Mexico the first time I talked to 3 sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we talked for about 4 hours. And I told them about 15 years of drinking and using and stealing and thieving and whoring and raising hell and being locked up and busting out and being locked up and busting out. And when we got all through with that, they were dressed nice, had big cowboy hats, drove a big Cadillac, you know. They walked back in the back with me, and 2 of them went outside, and the other guy came in and gave me the verdict. He says, "Young man, we don't really consider you eligible for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous on 2 counts. Number 1, you're only 25 years of age, and we think that's too young to be a real alcoholic. And secondly, we've checked with the booking desk, and we think you're really more a criminal type, and we really don't want your kind of people." So those of you that fall in somewhere in that age bracket, be grateful that AA has opened up its mind a little bit, and that we now are, you know, have people of all kinds and of all ages and of all everything. When I came back to AA, I had to kind of kick my way in. Now, they will tell you that you can't get sober unless you have a sincere desire to get sober, right? When I came in and Bill came in, the book said an honest desire to get sober. But somewhere in the 50s, they recognized that most alcoholics wouldn't recognize an honest desire if it walked up and hit them in the mouth. So they took out the word honest, you know, and now you're supposed to have a desire, right? Well, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with the desire to stomp somebody's ass. That's how I was at the end of a long running drunk, and my wife kept saying, "Let me call AA, let me call AA." I said, "What the hell are you going to call them for? They ain't going to come." And she said, "Well, let me call them." I said, "Go ahead and call them, I don't care. They won't come." And she called them, and when I woke up in the morning, I said, "Did they come?" And she said, "No." I said, "Those sons of bitches cannot do this to me 2 times running." And I headed for my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sole intention was to stomp some sanctimonious bastard's ass right through the concrete, wherever I found it, okay? Now, fortunately for me, I'd been on a 6 weeks drunk. I was in a condition that's sometimes called semi-comatose, not quite comatose, you know. I was hallucinating in and out. I'm what they call I go with my right and my left. You know, the dope's in the left-hand pocket and the bottle's in the right hand. And that's the way I drink and use. And that's the way I've drank and used all my life. And so I got going, and it took me 12 days to get this meeting, I might say. And because I had some places I had to check in before I got there, you see. And so I was just kind of drinking around, and it was time to go, so I met these 3 guys, a couple of sailors in the Linda Vista Tavern about 7 o'clock that Sunday morning, and we were drinking a little, and I told them I was trying to get this AA meeting, but I couldn't seem to get there. And they said, well, you don't need to go to any AA meeting, you know, you're a good-looking kid, and we'll sober up tomorrow, it's Monday, and go to work. They didn't know I didn't work, see. I was shining them on. And they said, everything will be all right. And I said, no, you don't understand. So I took them down to where my wife and kids were, and I said, you know, this is the end of the run. And you got to get me this AA meeting, or there's going to be 4 dead people in this house in the morning. And with that, this one sailor said, buddy, I don't know where this meeting's going to at, but you're going to it. I call those guys my 2 Eskimos now. See, I never saw them before, and I've never seen them since, to this day. But they carried me into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in December of 1952. They deposited me in a chair and told them, don't let this crazy bastard out of here. Whatever you guys do, do it, you know. And they disappeared. I don't know anything about that meeting. Nothing. I remember, you know, seeing my hand on the floor and a few things. And I got up, they tell me, halfway through the meeting and went out. And unfortunately, this was an upstairs meeting. And I went ass over tea kettle down those stairs. Now, I had sat in an AA meeting for maybe 30 minutes with a bunch of sober, clean people. This man that I came to know as my sponsor and a couple other guys came out, and they tell me this. I don't know this, but I believe it because it sounds right. He said to me, why are you leaving? And I said to him, I am leaving because I am not fit to sit in the same room with people like that. Now that is the power of Alcoholics Anonymous that exists in every room where meetings like this are held. It is a tremendous spiritual force, and somehow that idea that these are good people, and I don't belong here, because I didn't belong where good people were, got through to me even in that condition. And they said, well, we don't know about that, let's go. So they picked me up, my 3 sponsors, one on my shoulders and one on each leg. So the only unique thing I've done in AA really is I was carried into and out of my first meeting. These 3 guys took me home, and we sat on the floor for 5 hours. And they explained a whole lot of things to me that have changed my life completely. They told me first and foremost that if I was an alcoholic, I was not all of the things that I thought I was, nor was all of the things that the system kept telling me I was. They said, what you are is a human being who happens to be alcoholic. And if you are alcoholic, you cannot drink in the normal manner because you have a physical allergy to alcohol, a mental obsession that goes with the same, and you are spiritually ill. And after we talked a few minutes, my sponsor says, amend the 3rd part, you are spiritually dead. The reason he said that was because I was sitting there sort of like this, you know, and he said, God, and my head went right straight up, and I said, you say that one more time and your ass goes out the door. And he said, you're spiritually dead. We'll just put that on the shelf. Now, I am very grateful to a God that I do not profess to understand, that these 3 men were given to me as my sponsors, because the 3 of them showed me the 3 things that can happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. The man who was my number 1 sponsor stayed sober until his death some years ago with 29 years of sobriety. The second man couldn't stay sober more than 90 days at a crack, and I watched him do that for 12 years before he drank himself to death. And the third man, when I was on the program about 3 months, one night he just disappeared. Nobody ever seen anything of him or heard from him since. So in those three people, I have the whole picture of what Alcoholics Anonymous means. You can get sober and stay sober and live a life based on the 12 steps of this program and an understanding of a God you don't understand, in my case. Or you can keep banging your head on the wall until you die, because you will die, or you will get locked up, or one of those things. Ain't a hell of a lot of choice. Or you can just disappear. Now, I'm very grateful that I was so ding-a-ling that I stayed. I came through the Pathfinders in San Diego, if any of you have ever heard of that. It was down on 2nd and F Street, which is a place familiar to me as the old red light district. I used to run that when I was a kid. The burlesque shows and the whorehouses and the bars were there, and that's where I operated. And I knew it well. That's where I got my first tattoo, as a matter of fact, 1937. I got that for dime. That was a gang emblem. See, we put those on our arm with our name in it in case anybody got the arm cut off, we'd know whose arm it was. That tell you what I was like in 1937? Just a little, maybe. You don't have to be crazy to be an alcoholic, but some of us are before we ever drink. And I was placed under the supervision of the San Diego City School psychiatrist at the age of 8 because I tried to murder a guy with a baseball bat. I wasn't drunk. I was just mad. See, I was real mad all my life. And I had a whole lot of rage inside of me, and if you got in the damn way, that was your problem. And that's the way I lived. I was raised in a depression, and I was saved by World War II. What the hell do you want, you know? Man said to me, we will either try you as an adult and put you in the penitentiary, or you can volunteer for military service. I said, hell, I'm the biggest patriot you ever met, Judge. I'm ready. So, you know, I drank, and my problem with drinking was that I didn't know what I was doing. I'm a blackout drinker. My very first drunk I blacked out, and most of my drunks I blacked out. And when I blacked out, I was acting out the things inside of me that were negative. I didn't care if I hurt people. I used them up and spit them out. I'm not going to go into a lot of that stuff because you guys, some of you may have done some of those things. I doubt you're a nice-looking bunch of people. I doubt if you ever hooked any girls and put them on the line and sold their bodies and kicked their ass. I don't think you ever did that. But I did that. I would do anything to anybody to get what I wanted. Had absolutely no regard for people. My sponsor, when we had got to know each other a little bit, told me one time, he says, I think you are the most completely amoral human being I ever met. I took it as a compliment till I went home and looked up the word amoral. Totally lacking in any sense of morality or right or wrong. They didn't have any. So these people, these kind people in the Pathfinders, they took me under their wing, and they taught me everything I know. And they taught me a whole lot. They told me that if I was an alcoholic and I wanted to resolve my problem and live a good life, all I had to do was stop drinking. And in those days, they wouldn't talk about drugs in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I was grateful. My sponsor was willing to talk about drugs. See, he had a couple addictions himself. He was a drinker and a gambler. And when he joined AA, he quit gambling. So to him, it was the same principle. So you quit drinking and you quit using drugs, I'll guarantee you never have to drink again in your life. You'll work this simple program one day at a time. And that was good enough for me. See, they gave me, for the first time in my life, I felt there was some hope that I might possibly be able to live a normal life. Now, maybe to you a normal life don't mean much, but I never had one. I used to look at those people in those houses, and I look at those people that drove their own cars and things like that. And I used to want to be like them, but I knew I couldn't because I was what I was. And these people said, no, you can be anything you want to be. Anything that you're capable of being, you can be if you'll stay sober and Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything you want in this world that you're willing to work for and go after, pay the price for, you can have it if you'll stay sober in this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then they invite you to Santa Maria and give you 30 minutes to tell you what happened in 32 years of that. Ain't no way I can tell you, right? Except that I can tell you that every promise they made me came true. Everything they told me came true. I'm probably one of the most fortunate people that you will ever meet in your life. Because I forgot to mention, see, I was pronounced dead twice before I ever got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I killed myself once in an automobile wreck, and I was stabbed to death by a dope fiend friend of mine one night when we were arguing about whether the $5 went for booze or dope. He had the blade, he won, I lost. And every time I died, people kept bringing me back to life, and I resented it. Because I didn't want to be alive. I was on a suicide run all my life. I didn't like living. I thought the world was a pretty crappy place. I didn't know anything good about it, and I'd just soon check out. And then I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and all of a sudden, they showed me that life had value. My life has tremendous value to me today. Bill got happy birthday for his 80th birthday. Nobody sang happy birthday to me, and I was 59 years old yesterday. See that?
Back when you're ready.
Well, I'll tell you, Andy, I'll come back when I'm 80, and I'll take you up on that. And the reason I hope to be able to do that, you know, there was a pretty interesting bunch of people in that original Pathfinders group. One of whom was a guy named Jim Burwell, who helped write the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's the guy that put the phrase in there, God as you understand him. He insisted on that when they were writing the book, and I'm grateful that he did that. And I'm the guy that looked at Jim Burwell, 6 weeks sober. He says to me, young man, you cannot take one drink of anything, ever. And I said, Jim, you put enough damn money on the table and I'll drink anything in this town. And then that old man looked me in the eye and he said, and then what will you do? Harpoon right there, right? See, when we drink, we don't think about what we're going to do after the first drink. We never think of consequence. I never did in my whole life. But now I'm sober and I said, oh, you're right. What I will do is go back where I came from, and I don't want to go back where I came from. And I just got a real good education from these old guys. A little gal named Maggie walked up to me one day and she says, you know something, honey? I said, what? I had just spoken for about 3 minutes. She said, that's the first time I ever heard you speak without swearing. That kind of put me down just a little bit, you know, and then I realized, see, I didn't speak like these other people, these citizen people spoke. You know, I had some of that, what we used to call convict dope fiend jargon. You know, and every other word is an F word and this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, little Maggie made me aware that not everybody talks like you do. So I started trying to clean up my act a little bit. I haven't achieved that yet, and I probably never will, but it's a heck of a lot better now than it was, I'll guarantee you that. I think even Bill Margaret probably can confirm that. The one thing I have learned in AA is that everything's relative, you see. If you think I'm bad now, you should have seen me 32 years ago. And maybe 25 years from now, he'd be a little better than I am now. I don't know. But the difference is, the thing is that I've had a lot of tremendous life experiences since I've been on this program. For one thing, for instance, the last job I retired a couple of years ago because I felt like it. See, that's one thing you can do in Alcoholics Anonymous. See, they put me to work, but I'll be damned if they're going to make me work till 65. I retired at 56. That's what I want. And see, I found out that if you work steady for 30 years, you can retire. I never knew that. See, I was always trying to make the big score so I could retire to Brazil next week. Never did make that. But anyhow, I did that thing, and I thoroughly enjoyed being retired, and I work a little bit. And one of the great ironies of I work a little bit with a law firm. And that ties in with the last time I was promoted on the last job I had. One of those people came in and put their hands ahead, and my God, who would think we'd ever have a guy like this with a record in this position? I said, hey, buddy, it just means the organization's getting very progressive, that's all. But see, all those things in the background that I thought were so bad, I found out they weren't a bar. I went through hell cleaning some of that stuff up, but it got cleaned up, and then I got in a position, the first time, for instance, I was working and they come out and they handed me that Form 57, that good old PSQ, and I said, oh, Christ, all I want to do is split. But no, you don't split. You don't run anymore. You go talk to your sponsor. I said, okay, here's the problem. He said, what's the problem? I said, well, I don't know why they want me to fill this out, but it says here, if I lie on here, I get a 5 and dime from the feds. And he said, okay. And I said, if I tell the truth on here, I'm good for 5 years to life in 3 states in the territory of Hawaii. What the hell do I do now? And you know what that old man told me? Tell the truth. I said, you got to be kidding. He said, no, tell the truth, because the truth's going to set you free. And I said, I don't believe that. He said, well, I'll tell you what, you tell the truth, and if they pick you up, I'll guarantee you have a good lawyer. You got a lot of friends in AA, and if you got to do time, I'll guarantee your family's taken care of. And he was a millionaire, so he could do that. So I told the truth. And, I haven't been in that position in later years where I was in charge of that kind of stuff. I can tell you that's one of the goddamnest PSQs on file with the United States government. When the secretary was siphoning it, she went about halfway and she looked at me and she said, Jesus Christ, Mr. Stone. And I said, well, honey, that's the past. That's the past. But the reason I tell that is because people sometimes see, I used to have that old whine, ain't nobody ever going to give a guy like me with my kind of background a decent job. And my sponsor looked me right in the eye and he says, they sure ain't while you're sitting on your ass whining, you son of a bitch. Get going. So I went out and got going. My first job was $1.10 an hour cutting plate in a steel yard. And I retired 31 years later. I was making $70,000 a year, and I was in charge of an organization of, 700, 800 people, and in charge of work dealing with 84,000 people. And not one job that I have held since 1956 was I qualified for. Not one. Now, you tell me there isn't any power in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was appointed to a job in 1963 by President Kennedy, and we went through that interview stuff in Washington where here's the resume and the experience, job experience, and here's the record. And they go through that all day, Finally got to the man that's going to say yes or no. I only did this because I was convinced they'd never appoint anybody like me to that kind of a job. And all day long I was waiting for them to open the big envelope, and they never did. Finally we get to the man, and he says, well, everybody tells me you're a real sharp guy and you really know your business. I said, that's real nice. He says, I understand you had a lot of difficulties with drinking and things when you were younger. And I thought, well, I've only been sober 12, 13 years. I ain't totally positive yet. My mind says, well, here it comes, I said, yes, sir, that's true. He says, also understand you've been in Alcoholics Anonymous a long time doing a hell of a job. I said, well, thank you for that compliment. And with that, he stood up and walked around that 12-foot desk, stuck out his hand, and said, we're going to be very happy to have you with us. If you don't believe miracles happen here, just keep walking and you'll live in them. I have lived them. We went across the street in June of 1963, and that very beautiful man shook my hand. And John Kennedy said to me, 13 years out of a psycho ward in an institution for the rest of my life, John Kennedy said to me, I am happy to meet you. Now, if you don't believe in spiritual experiences, try that. Because people don't come from where I come from to that point, except through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. This program manufactures miracles daily. And I was in charge of operations at Vandenberg Air Force Base the day that man was shot. And I cried then, and I'll cry now. And that's all right. Because I learned a lesson there. My sponsor years before had told me never envy another human being. And I didn't understand what he meant until 1963. So we go on and on and on. And I lived in Santa Maria, and I was in AA in Santa Maria, and a lot of good friends, and I was reading the names up there, Mark Johnson, and Roy Sherrill, Bill, Margaret, and Bob, Jim's dad, Denny, various people. And I see almost just a few people here I know, but there's a whole lot of people here, and that's great. And I went from here, I went to the East Coast, and I had a lot of fun experiences back there. And then I came back to the West Coast. I've been all over this country in meetings with Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, I can tell you that even though the meeting format's different, the time's different, those kind of things, that the feeling, the love that exists in Alcoholics Anonymous, you will find anywhere you go in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I go to New England and I sit down in an AA meeting and the guy says, "My name's Joe," and I said, "Hello, Joe," and nobody else said, "Hello, Joe." You know. And then somebody talked and I clapped my hands and nobody clapped their hands. And I talked to the secretary and I said, "We're going to have to change this meeting." We changed it because he worked for me. And now you know there's a whole little area in there where they clap hands and say, "Hi, Joe," and everything. That's something else my sponsor told me. If you don't like something, don't bitch about it, fix it. Another way they used to say that is it's better to light one little candle than to sit in the darkness. And I think that's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. We have the opportunity to light one little candle sometimes. And the benefits flow to me. The benefits will flow to you. And they will flow to those that you're around, your family, your friends, people you work with. I've had 2 or 3 bosses ask me, "I don't understand how you can deal with people like you deal with and get these things done. How do you do it?" I tell them I do magic tricks. See, normal people would understand do magic tricks. What they don't understand is that I just goddamn keep my word, that's all. I'm honest. And when I tell somebody that's a deal, it's a deal. And when I started dealing with people 30 years ago, once they understood that, to this day I can go down and sit down with people in the trades or any other major organization, and when I say it's a deal, they believe it. Because I believe in being honest. And I practice that in all of my affairs. And I have been asked to be dishonest in order to advance myself in an organization, and I told them I would not do that, and I left that organization. Because my sponsor told me you got to be honest with yourself and practice that in all of your affairs with everybody. And being a thief, of course, I'm an extremist. When I worked in the shop, everybody was mad at me because I wouldn't steal material, I wouldn't make them feed blocks, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. You know, you're square. And when I got an expense account, everybody came and said, "You're screwing us up." I said, "Why is that?" "Well, we all went to the same conference and we put in $1,200 a piece and you only put in $300. And I said, "Well, that's what I spent, $300. But you don't understand how you do this." I said, "Yeah, I understand how I do it." "You know, you do whatever you want, but I do it. I spend $300, that's what I get." The auditor came througand said, "I don't know what's happening in this organization, but everybody's putting in clean expense accounts." We're saving a lot of money for the company, you know. So, you know, I find that you can deal with just about anybody, and it's honesty. I told my sponsor, honesty is the damnedest gimmick whoever dreamed it up was really something. I said, if I'd have known about that when I was stealing, I could have been a millionaire by the time I was 16 years old. But I thought dishonesty was the way you did it, but that's not the fact. It's a fundamental principle of this program. And we don't like being honest. I don't like being honest all the time. And I got the kind of a mind that goes crazy every once in a while, you know. I've been playing the Canadian lottery for years. I ain't never won a damn thing. And my wife went on a trip a little while ago, and she took her down to the airport, and she was going to cross country, and we had been talking about the lottery, and on the way back I went by a bank. I've never even told her this. And through my mind it went, well, while she's gone I could hit one bank, tell her we hit the lottery. And then I'm going to have a birthday this year, right? My mind is my biggest single enemy, you know. It keeps doing crazy things like that. But it's just fun, just exercises, I guess. I might say that there's a lot of benefits to being sober. I was at a meeting recently where a gal said this. On just exercises, I guess. I might say that there's a lot of benefits to being sober. I was at a meeting recently where a gal said this is $1 million program. And that sort of ticked something off my head, and I sat down and I figured out something that I had never figured out, William. I have made over $1 million since I've been in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and spent just damn near every dime of it on good living, you see. Because I have told people who say you should save money, I say, no, I live one day at a time. I want to live good today. I want to go first class. And if I see something I want, I'm going to get it. And the other side of the coin is stay heavily insured so that if anything happens to me, people that I'm responsible for are taken care of. And I've lived that way all my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. And people say, Guy, you know, they say, well, you're not going to have a whole lot of money in the bank. So what? I don't want to be the richest man in the graveyard. That's not the place for it. This is the place for it, okay? And there's one thing about being sober and working for a living, you know, you get to keep the money. I think that's a fantastic thing. You get to keep it. See, before I come to AA, they used to shove it in an envelope and put it in a place called this evidence box. I didn't get to keep it. But when you come here, you get to keep it. See, just all kinds of stuff, good stuff happens here, you know. And I don't know, you know, I'm just rambling around. One of my biggest things that I need to tell you is that I have 8 children. And of my 8 children, 3 of them are members of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. My daughter Julie, who just gave me a granddaughter last Wednesday night, has 6 years on this program. My son Philip has 3 November 10th, and my son Chris, who is 21 years old, has 2 on December 7th or something like that. And you know, I learned a whole lot living through that with those kids. You know that T-shirt that says live long enough to drive your kids insane? Well, there's another one that says live long enough and your kids will drive you insane, you know. And while they were doing their number, I learned a whole lot more about how to release people with love and not try to live their lives for them and hope and pray that they would be okay. And I'm here to tell you, after 11 years of that, they're all sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's pretty damn fantastic as far as I'm concerned. And I'm now a 5-time grandfather. I have 3 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. And the granddaughters are both about a month old, a week old and a month old. And these are the kind of things that I would have never known if I had not come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I would have never known that. My son Philip came up and took us out to dinner Friday, and he picked up the tab. Now that shows you what happens when they get sober. That don't happen unless they're sober. And all these other good things, you know, what can I say? I've been in so many places, had so many great things happen. Oh, that reminds me, somebody said, do you mind if I tape this? And I've always told people, I don't mind if you tape it, because if you print it, I'll just deny it. I was telling Bill before the meeting, when I was back on the East Coast, I had a little relationship going with the Mafia. And they said, you know, if you don't do what we want you to do, we'll reveal your past to everybody. I said, go ahead, it's a matter of public record. I don't give a damn, go ahead. And they said, oh shit, now what do we do? Because my life is a matter of public record. And that's okay, you know, that's why I don't worry too. I've never worried about anonymity. You know, I sobered up in San Diego where I was raised. And when I sobered up, everybody knew something had happened. You know, because I wasn't in the news or anything anymore, and they sure as hell knew something happened. So I've always taken the approach, you know, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My life's an open book, and if it bothers you, I'm sorry, but it don't bother me at all, because I was taught that I can live with what I am, the good and the bad. And, you know, if you live long enough, hopefully the good outweighs the bad. I guess that's the way you look at it. That's the way I'm trying to look at it anyhow. And I have had all kinds of fun with this program. I do not do it the way most people do it. You might have expected somebody to come up here and tell you got to start with step 1 and work right straight through step 12. I never did that. I don't tell people to do that. I say, if that's the way you want to do it, you do it. Basically, I'm a book person. To me, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the only book I read. I don't need any other books or any other philosophies or anything else, because my sponsor told me that everything in my life, every question I would ever have in my life is answered within the pages of that book. And I'm here to tell you that that has been true. Now, you might say, how does that work? Well, the way that works is you got an old beat-up Ford. See, I never owned cars before I came to AA. I've been driving since I was 8, but I never owned cars because that was too much trouble. I just switched cars. So when I came to AA, they made me buy a damn car and get a license and register it and all that crap. And the damn thing breaks down. I checked it out in the solenoid shop. And I need $7, and I ain't got $7. So I called up my sponsor and I said, I know I don't steal cars. I understand that. But how about just stealing a damn solenoid? He said, no. He says, have you read on this? I said, no, I haven't. He says, well, read the book. It tells you what you do when you got a problem that you can't do anything about. You know, it does tell you that. On the right-hand side of the page, and I won't tell you what page, but it's on the right-hand side, and it's the last paragraph, and it says, if you have done everything that you can do with this problem, and there's nothing more you can do, and it remains unresolved, turn it over and say, thy will be done. And I looked around to make sure nobody was watching. I said, this is the most stupid thing I ever thought. And I said, okay, you got it. Thy will be done. And you know what happened? I've been in a firestorm there for about 3 hours trying to figure out how to fix this my way, right? The very next thought I had was, why don't you ask John B., who lives next door to you and works in the same shop that you do, if you can ride to work with him for a couple of days so you get paid and you will have $7 and you can buy a solenoid. So that's the way that book works for me. I have never asked it a question that I could not find the answer. I was asked to do something when I was 4 years sober by people outside of AA, and I went to my sponsor. I said, of course, these people want me to do this, but I don't have to do it, right, because they ain't in AA, right? He says, where in the book does it tell you that you only do things for people that are in AA? I said, oh, it's in there. Yeah, he says, show me. And I read that book 14 times, and that same paragraph, you know, top paragraph, second paragraph, this side of the page, it says, the purpose of this program is to be of service to God and our fellow men, period. Don't say fellow men in AA. I said, okay. And so I went out and did what they asked me to do, you know. And that turned out good for me. See, everything I have done on the basis that I do not believe that what you're telling me will work. I do not believe in the principles you're trying to make me live by. I don't believe in God. Don't even discuss that with me. I just choose not to discuss it. I'm not going to work these steps in order because, you know, I take the ones with God out. I'll work on the rest of them. And I worked step 1 and 12 for a couple of years, and then my sponsor put me on to 10. And then I went on to 8 and 9. And when I was about 20 years sober, somebody said, if you don't do a 5th step, you're going to get drunk. I said, you know, I've never written a damn thing. You know, I don't write inventories. My sponsor conned me into a 15-minute verbal inventory. He brought me 2 little cards. One of them was the 7 deadly sins. He said, do you know what those are? And I said, no. And he said, read that. And I read it. He says, are you guilty of any of those sins? I said, sure, all of them. He says, good. Here's another card. That little card said the 10 Commandments. He says, do you know what they are? I said, I heard about them. He says, read that card. I read it. He says, have you broken any of those commandments? I said, most of them. He said, good. That is the exact nature of all of your wrongs. You are to stay sober on a daily basis and not do those things anymore. You have just completed step 4 and 5. Let's get on. That's how simple it can be, you see. And nowadays we have a lot of amateur psychologists in AA, and they write voluminous inventories, and people analyze them and all this bullshit. You know, I've had lots of people share them with me, and I said, make a hell of a movie, but why don't you go back and write a moral inventory, you know? Because that's what the word says, moral inventory, not immoral inventory. We don't want to know all the negative things that you have done, you know, who you did it to and how many you did it to twice and all that stuff. That's not what it's talking about. So that's the way I handle those, you know, and humbly ask him. I never ask anybody humbly anything in my life. But I've had the experience of having the opportunity to indulge. Classic case, I was asked one day to go down and pick up a check, which I did not normally pick up. The treasurer did. But this was a check which I could sign and cash. Okay? And I was about 4 or 5 years sober, somewhere in there. And I said, well, I can't go down and do it because I ain't got my car here. I'll get out of it, right? I'm really lazy. Guy says, here, take the keys to my car, a brand new 1954 Chevrolet convertible. Oh, boy. So I go down and I pick up this check, and it's just in an envelope, so I put it up against the sun like that because I'm nosy, you know. $38,836.73. I've been sober a long time, right? The nature of my wrongs. You know, I sat there and my mind said, you can go 3 blocks to the Bank of America, cash this check, you got a brand new Chevy, 38 grand, and you're 16 miles from the border. I sat there for 45 minutes and debated the pros and cons of that proposition. And thank God I had had it pounded into me enough at that point that I said, okay. Okay. And I went down and I deposited the check and I went back, gave the guy the keys to his car, and that was that. I was given the opportunity. And I like to think the old boy was testing me to see if I really was serious about this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. See, because if I'd have taken that, I'd have sold myself real short. Real short. I had a lot of fun. Some of you may think this is a program where you come to die, if you're young, you know. I was young when I got here, and I didn't come here to die. I found out this is where you live. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't like about me or get upset about me is that I go nightclubbing a lot, starting with my 30th day of sobriety in Tijuana, Mexico, all night, celebrating my 30th day of sobriety. Thought I might go to Tijuana and see what it looked like sober. I'd never been there sober. And I go to nightclubs, and I go to the best restaurants, and we go to Las Vegas, and we go to New York, and we go to Miami, we go wherever you want to go. I eat all the good restaurants, all the good places. You know, and I pay $25 for a ginger ale, and I pay $40 for 2 tonic waters to watch the foliage air. And you know, some is cheap at half the price. And I'm with people, all of whom are drinking. Everybody in my business drinks, except a few of us that are in AA. And you know, nobody's ever bothered me about, why don't you have a drink? Well, one guy did one time. He made a mistake. He insisted that I have a drink with him, and I said, I'll have a drink with you. And I told the bartender what I wanted, and he said, oh no, you drink with me, you drink what I drink. And 2 of the guys that worked with me, they are 6'5" and about 400 pounds apiece. They just kind of eased in and said, don't you understand, the boy don't drink? And he says, oh, okay, yeah. See, there's a very funny thing, but you'll find that people who really like you and people who care about you will protect you from others and from yourself. That's a fact. I found that out through living it in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I have thoroughly enjoyed all kinds of good things in this program. Good living, good people, good relationships, good everything. That don't mean I haven't had problems, you know. I've had all kinds of problems. I've had financial problems. I do things backwards. I got divorced when I was 20 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous because of irreconcilable differences. I was told that if I would simply join my wife in her new religious organization, I could drink. I said, no, I can't drink. So you got to go your way, I'll go mine. That's okay. I've had 79, I was looking forward to retirement, and all of a sudden I got this swelling in my chest, and it's tender, and I agreed, you know, I know the damn symptoms, and I said, oh Christ, I don't go near doctors, you know, doctors kill people. I stay away from doctors. But in this case, I said, well, I better go find out what it is. So I went down, the doctor goes, boom, boom, and he listened to my heart, and he says, can you go in the hospital in the morning to have that out? And I said, no, but how about Monday? That was a big mistake. If they say in the morning, go in the morning. Because on Friday, when I told him Monday, I gave myself all weekend to figure out I was dying. I had the nightmare of looking into my grave, and all that crap that's in my head. I went in Monday and they took it out. Strange thing happened there. He never told me this until 6 weeks later. When he was taking out the final stitches, he said, you really have something going for you. I said, why is that? He says, that kind of tumor that I took out of your lung, 99 out of 100 of them are malignant. You got the 1 out of 100 that was benign. I said, yeah, I know, I got something going for me. He said, you really do? I said, yeah, I know. And I thank that guy that I don't understand one more time. Because, he's going to keep me around until I'm of no service anymore, until values no service to, and then he'll just pull the plug and that'll be that. And that's good. See, that's a reason for my life. I retired. A lot of people didn't understand this. They said, how can you voluntarily step out of this big position with all this status and all this bullshit and tell us that you're going to go and retire and go to AA meeting? That's crazy. I said, no, it's not crazy. That's what I want to do. And they told me in Alcoholics Anonymous I could do whatever I want to do if I was willing to pay the price, and I am willing to pay the price. And this is what I do nowadays. I work a little bit every once in a while, but most of the time I just go to AA meetings, I go on 12-step calls, and I go on panels to rehabs and to penitentiaries. I spent 25 years in penitentiaries, sort of trying to make it up on the installment plan just a little, And I sponsored a whole bunch of people out of penitentiaries. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. I co-signed for cars for 38 convicts, never cost me a dime. I co-signed for a car for my daughter, cost me $4,000. Welcome to the club, right? So learn from that. Sign for convicts, not for children. Anyhow, I'm just kind of rambling because I feel in that mood. I've been laying down here. My wife says, take a nap. I'm taking a nap. I'm thinking all of the things that I went through here. They helped build Sisters Hospital. They needed money. I went out and hustled money. I done all these different things. And I really thoroughly love this town. And it's nice to be here, even if it's only for, a little while. I know this meeting's supposed to be over at 8, but I always deliberately run over just a little. The reason I do that, you see, this is one of my pervert. Bill said he's going to start banging. Go ahead, I won't pay any attention. The reason I like to do that is that this, to me, is symptomatic of the true alcoholic. See, these people, when it says 8 o'clock, they start looking at their watch and they say, don't this son of a bitch know this meeting's over at 8 o'clock? They are so punctual, these sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love it. They're the same bastards you can't pull off a stool at the hitching post at 2 o'clock in the morning. Same people, right? But we get so righteous when we're sober. So I just like to deliberately run over just a little bit and watch who's looking, who's looking. I say, well, there's one, okay. Because, that's the way this life is. I'll tell you one story and tell you how lucky you are, and then I'll sit down. When I went east in 1963 to Washington, there was a party held for me in a facility of the Adult Authority of the state of California, which 185 convicts and 100 people from Alcoholics Anonymous attended. And the man in charge said, the superintendent cannot be here tonight, but he wishes you well. And he has told us that many times he has heard you say that you would like to be able to speak as long as you could sometime to the guys in here. So tonight, you are free to speak as long as you want to, and the lights will not go out in this institution until you are done. Now you tell me any other power that you know of that can keep the lights on in a penitentiary, maximum security penitentiary in the state of California, and I'll buy in with you, because I don't know of any other power that can do that. You see, because all of these things are not compliments to me. They are compliments to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that takes people like me and teaches us how to be of service to God and our fellow men. I take no credit for my sobriety or anything I have ever done during my sobriety. My sobriety is a gift of God, and the life experiences that I've been given have been gifts of God. And I can tell you that no matter how bad things may have seemed on occasion, it has always worked out all right. As long as we stay sober, one day at a time, and work this program